Hi everyone, in this video tutorial I'm going to present you how to test REST web services with the help of SoapUI. As you can see here, the version I'm using is 5.0.0. The tutorial will be divided in two parts. In the first part I'm going to create a new REST project, add some resources to it and generate a simple test suite to test those resources. In the second part of the tutorial, I'm going to present you more advanced features of SoapUI by having a look at a project I specially developed for the example from the Codepedia blog post. Okay, so let's start. Let's create a new project, file, new REST project. SoapUI requires that you provide an initial URI to test. So I'm gonna provide mine. It's localhost 888 because here on this port it started the Jetty server, and under podcasts is are the resources, the podcast resources we want to test. Okay, you can see SoapUI generates automatically a get method on the resource we provided. Because I have already started Jetty, this should work. If I click here, submit request, yeah, indeed we have some answers. So basically this brings back all the podcasts that are available under the podcast resources. Of course I want to test operation also on a single podcast resources, so for that I'm going to have to add a new sub resources for podcasts. So the easy way to do it is go here, podcast, right click and new child resources. I'm going to provide a template now in the URI, something like this, ID in curly braces. And again, REST SoapUI generates a default get method for that, and also adds default value to the ID parameter specified here. So I'm going to do here 1, and if I execute this get method, well, I'm getting another response. As you can see, the default display is in XML, but I'm interested in JSON, and you can also see JSON. Of course, you could also see the raw response. You have here the HTTP protocol, the status, the headers, and you can see I have the Jetty version 9.7 running, the application, and in the end you have the body containing the JSON response. Alright, I'm going to do a rename of the project now. Simple REST project. And also rename the operations that SoapUI generated automatically for me. Get all podcasts, for example, and get podcast by ID. Let's call it like this. Okay, the next step I'm going to show you is how to generate a test suite based on the resources we have already. So if I go here, I'm going to select generate test suite. Here you see you have more possibilities, one test case for each resources, or single test case with one request for each method. I'm going to select the second one and click OK. Let's enter a name. I'm going to call you simple test suite. Okay, let's see what SoapUI did for us. So if I'm going here, you see it automatically generated two REST, a test suite with two test steps, and these are exactly the resources, the get requests that I showed you earlier. Of course, I can run the selected test cases. Everything green, of course, they worked and I had no assertion on them. So let's take this one to add some assertion. Click play again, of course. Let's say I'm sure that every time this static in history should appear in my response, then I go here to assertion and add a new assertion, and here it should contain add, and this is static in history. Okay, execute it again, and again my assertion is valid. We can add also HTTP status assertion to verify the HTTP status that comes back. I'm gonna have here property contained invalid valid HTTP status codes. Select this, and here I have to provide the status code I'm expected for this request. So it's 200 and OK status, and again it's valid. Let's have a quick look on the second. Request. Here you can see I can modify the value because I set the default to 1, but if I set it to 2 now, I get a 404 code. If I'm looking here, not found, because there is no podcast available on this URI. This is what I expected it. So we could rename this expect not found for podcast ID, something like that. And here I can go into another assertion. You see now, if I go to recently used, it has already the 2 assertion I added earlier. Let's do a valid status, and this will be 404. Okay, and the assertion is valid, and the test suite, if I execute it again, it works pretty fast and it validates both the requests. So I think that's pretty much for the first part. Now I'm going to present you a more advanced REST SoapUI test suite. Okay, first I'm going to close all these windows and expand the REST advanced project, so to say. Okay, you see it's similar to the previous one. I have here a podcasts resource and podcasts identified by ID resource URI. In comparison to the simple project, I have different operations defined here, like get, post, put, and delete, because I've developed a test suite that will have create, read, update, and delete podcast resources. You can easily do this. For example, if you right click here and new method, you want to specify here what kind of HTTP method you want to use. Let's do a head here, do a head and if I do here ID 888 HTTP. Okay, so the resource is available. So I created more test suites. One is for create. It has several steps. So the first one is to prepare, so to say, the test environment where I delete all the podcast resources, and after that I'm trying to add a new podcast with errors in the beginning. Then I'm going to add correctly via post method, and another one via a put method. So here, if I execute the delete method on the resources, we'll delete all the podcasts. Assertion is as expected at 204, because usually when you do a delete on a REST resource and it's successful, you should return 204 status. Now I'm trying to do an insertion, and I'm doing that by doing a post with the resource in JSON format. But because on the backend API it requires also to add a feed property for the podcast, this should not be accepted. So if I'm executing it, okay, what it says here, please verify that the feed is properly generated. And if I'm looking here in row, I have a 400 bat requests. So this means that the client has to modify something on his input to make the request successful. The same holds true for when you send the request without a title. Now I have two assertions. So the one is also contained that it should verify that the title is properly generated, and again the status is 400. This is bad request. Now so let's do a successful request, a successful insertion of a podcast resource. So you see, you do it under the collections resources and with a post method. And voila, the response is raw 201 created. So when you do an insertion, a successful insertion, you should get a 201 back. And in addition to that, you should also have the location as header, the location where the podcast has been created. Now, if I'm trying to do a post with the same resources, so it should bring up a conflict, but because already I have a podcast in the database with the same feed, so you can see here I have a 409 conflict code telling the client, hey, you have provided some wrong input, have another look at it. And based on my message, of course, the message is also relevant, saying, you can see here, podcasts with feed already exist in the database under podcast/1 as the ID. So the client should know now just to modify the feed. So if I'm doing, okay, the next operation is also podcast insertion, but via a put operation. So when you do a put, you should already know the URI where this resource is inserted. So you have to provide the ID where you're expecting it and all the details that are necessary for insertion. I'm gonna execute it now, and a new podcast has been created. So you see I have again a 201 created, and the location header where this a resource has been created. So it's under podcast/2. I have also some assertions here. So again, the valid stat is 201, and verify of the location header. You can do this by having a script assertion. You say assert message exchange response headers, and the location should be this one. Okay. Now the second test suite is just to read some stuff, because we created some and now we're going to read them. Again, I'm interested in JSON. Assertion value is 200, and I know that for the first podcast the feed is feed placeholder, so I can do assertion on that too. And the second get requests will bring all the podcasts by ordered descendantly by the order of insertion date. So this is a filter parameter I can add to the URI. Here also validation on the status is 200 for read normally, and property of the two podcasts are validated. Now let's go on to update. Okay, so again, an update you usually do with a put method, but put requires that the updates are complete, in that all the properties that you provide should reflect the new state of the resource. So if I do here an update with these provided resources, so of course I can do theoretically the put, but to be RESTful, if I do the put with its input provided here, the description parameter should not be there anymore, and I don't want that. So this should be not accepted as proper update. Again, I have a relevant message here too, so I get a 400. This is bad request, and you can see required properties are ID, feed, link, and description. Actually all of them, because the resource has all of them. So I'm going to do a put with the whole the complete resource in JSON format. So you can see what I'm updating here is actually this feed property. Before it was feed placeholder, and now I'm adding the real feed for the podcast resource. So you can see here I have a 200. Okay, this is usually the HTTP status sent back after a successful update, and the location where the podcast is to find. Now, around partial updates, there's a whole discussion, as I mentioned also in the blog post. You can do it also with a put, but it's not RESTful conform. You can do it with the patch method, which seems to be the way to go, and also with the post. Somehow abuse it a little bit, but anyway, post, you can always abuse it if it serves your purposes. So this is what I did here. I didn't do a patch because Jersey framework does not support that yet. So I'm here, I'm trying to do a post partial update on a resource here that is not existing. So I would like to update the title, let's say, the podcast. Of course, I get a 404 not found, please verify your ID, blah blah blah. So, and now I'll do a successful partial update on the correct URI. So here I'm going to update the title from Quarks and Code to Midnummer to Quarks and Code to Midnummer plus great resource. The podcast specifier has been successfully updated, so I have a HTTP 200 and with a corresponding message. I can verify this if I go back to read. Let's change here from 1 to 2. So you see now I have the new title and the correct feed URI. I updated via the put method. That's pretty much what you can do with put, and at the end I would want to delete a podcast resource. So you have to do a delete on a resource you want to delete and provide the ID, assertions, status. It's okay, as I mentioned, for delete usually do a 204 when the delete was successful. Now I'm trying to get again that Quarks podcast resource, and I should get a 404. Why is it taking so long? Sometimes Jetty hangs, I don't know why. Didn't have the chance to check that. Let's stop and do it again. Okay, this time worked very quickly. So again, a 404 not found. Please verify that the podcast is also available in the database. Okay, something like that. So this was pretty much what I wanted to show you in how to test the REST web services with SoapUI. I hope you found it interesting, and of course the whole SoapUI test project and the source code is available on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/codingpedia, you'll find there under demo REST Jersey Spring project the source code for the example, and also the SoapUI test resource. Well, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Bye bye.